Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, freak shows were regarded as a prominent feature of American culture. These shows were seen as an acceptable form of entertainment for the poor class and proved very profitable for the showmen. But no matter how strange or scary these performers appeared, they were real people with stories that often went far beyond the stage lights. Today, we'll look at the 15 strangest circus freaks you won't believe existed. Let's start off this list with number 15, the Oklahoma outlaw mannequin mummy. Before death, Elmer McCurdy was the kind of criminal you'd find in a dusty western. After death, he became something stranger, like a Hitchcock character left to rot in a sideshow. Shot by lawmen after a botched train robbery in 1911, his body was embalmed so thoroughly by a local funeral home that it mummified. For 5 years, he stood on display. Then a carnival promoter showed up, claimed to be a relative, and took McCurdy's corpse on the road as the Oklahoma outlaw. For the next 60 years, McCurdy's body was passed between carnivals, freak shows, and wax museums. Eventually, he ended up hanging in a funhouse. In 1976, a worker accidentally broke his arm, revealing a human bone. After that, the police were called. A museum ticket was found stuffed in his mouth. That's how they traced him back. In 1977, McCurdy was finally buried. It took 66 years, 2 coasts, and 100 lies to let him rest. Number 14, the white and black twins. In the 1860s, Helen Ann and Henry Sedum Walker were twins born to black parents, but Helen had albinism and Henry didn't. That made them a spectacle. For years, the twins were shown in museums across the country, their skin color framed as novelty. Posters advertised them as white and black twins, born on May 2, 1856, exhibited from St. Louis to New Orleans and Pittsburgh. They were listed in censuses as mulatto, living with their mom in New York. Photos of them appeared with museums like Burnell and Prescott's. After the exhibitions, Henry seemed to vanish. One census lists him as a doorman in Pittsburgh in 1870. Helen lived longer, marrying 3 times, including to another albino, Charles Price. Both graves now have markers, placed by descendants who only recently pieced together their story. In a world that reduced them to a headline, Helen and Henry left a trace. Their images were used, but their names weren't lost. Number 13, Little Count Teddy. Theo Salem, better known as Little Count Teddy, was a showman in every sense. Born July 23, 1885 in Louisville, he stood even smaller than Tom Thumb. But his act wasn't just his size, it was his voice. Theo performed poems, satirical recitals, witty lectures, and a strange genre he called lawfology. His posters promised laughs, lectures, and satire under the banner, "Yours for Amusement." His slogans read like vaudeville punchlines, smaller than Tom Thumb and still single. But behind the quips, Theo was one of the last self-managed miniature performers to tour solo across the country. There was no freak show banner or exotic backstory. Just a man, under 3 feet tall, who sold punchlines and poetry to the crowd. He may not have drawn the biggest tent, but his words lingered long after the laughter. Count Teddy made his difference his weapon, not for pity or shock, but to speak, joke, and be remembered as a voice, not a freak. Number 12, the Wild Spotted Boy. Mungo Lark toured the country as the Wild Spotted Boy, a title built more on myth than fact. He had vitiligo, a skin condition that caused his pigment to fade in uneven patches. But the story sold to crowds was that he came from a lost tribe of spotted Africans. That fiction was printed on banners, shouted by barkers, and repeated by curious patrons across the U.S. Mungo's real life is harder to trace. His name, the photos, and the illness were real. But the rest was crafted to stir imaginations, not tell the truth. He wasn't a wild child. He was a young man with a skin condition that made him different in a world that punished difference with spectacle. His identity was rewritten by promoters, but the spots were his alone. Mungo Lark didn't need a jungle myth or made-up tribe. His body told its own story, one that didn't require lies to be unforgettable. Number 11. The Man Turning to Stone. Charles S. Porter was born in New Haven on April 24, 1900. At age 30, his body began to betray him. He had fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, an extremely rare disease that slowly turned soft tissue into bone. Movement became harder with each passing year. Pain came with it. But instead of vanishing into quiet decline, Charles stepped into the spotlight. He became known as the Man Turning to Stone. He traveled and exhibited himself in carnivals and museums, his condition recast as performance. He wasn't a showman by trade, but the freak show gave him a way to survive. He didn't bite chickens, juggle weights, or perform tricks. He simply sat and let the world look. There's no record of when Charles died, only that he disappeared from billing sheets. He became one of the many whose names faded, but whose bodies left the audience unsettled. Not because they were grotesque, but because they were real. Number 10. Ernie Defort. Ernie Defort was born on July 7, 1931, and the world gave him a second name before he could speak. They called him Ernie Len, the world's strangest living boy, a title printed on carnival banners and whispered through small-town papers. His parasitic twin, whose name was Len, grew from his chest, silent but ever-present. When surgeons removed Len in 1943, doctors called it a triumph. Ernie called it survival. The medical world treated him like a miracle specimen, while strangers saw him as half boy, half ghost. He grew older and faded from headlines, but stories persisted of a man who'd married, settled down, and lived quietly somewhere in the Midwest. No one knows if he's still alive. For all the photographs, newspaper clippings, and medical notes, there's almost nothing of his own voice. Maybe that's how he wanted it. For once, he could decide who looked, who listened, and who never saw him again. Number 9. Dolly Dutton. Dolly Dutton, born Alice Marie in 1852, stood barely over 3 feet tall, yet carried herself like she was 10 feet high. Billed as the Little Fairy, she toured New England alongside her sister Etta, performing songs and readings until Etta's death at 8 left her alone on stage. Dolly kept performing but also worked as a teacher, a woman trying to hold 2 lives at once. Records show that in 1882, she was admitted to an asylum for domestic troubles, a vague phrase that never told the full truth. Her time there was short, ending with her death in 1890 at 38. Circus papers remembered her sequined dresses. Her students remembered her patience and quiet intelligence. For all the gawking crowds and show posters, Dolly's life was shaped less by the circus than by her persistence. She never wanted sympathy, only space to be both small and strong, and in her own way, she was. What do you think about her? Well, let us know. Number 8. The Elephant Skin Man. Ralph Albert Kruner was born in 1888 in Montpelier, Vermont, and the world never stopped staring. His skin thickened and folded early in life, his hands and knees rough and heavy as leather. They called him the Elephant Skin Man, and from then on, he lived between medicine and spectacle. Doctors argued over his diagnosis. Some said pachydermoperiostosis, others ichthyosis, but showmen preferred superstition. They told stories of his mother witnessing an elephant stampede while pregnant, as if trauma could sculpt skin. Ralph ignored it all. He worked traveling fairs and dime museums, posing with a tired grin, taking his pay in cash. He wasn't rich, but he was free in his own strange way. He booked his own appearances, made his own rules, and refused pity. When he died in 1952, The stories grew wilder, but the truth stayed simple. Ralph Kruner turned the skin that confined him into the armor that kept him alive. Number 7. Rudolph Ivanovich and Heinrich Haag. Rudolph was known for his hair, thick, dark, and wild, covering his chest and back like a coat. On stage, he became the wild man of Siberia, crouching behind bars and gnawing at raw meat while audiences gasped. It was theater, pure and simple, yet people believed every snarl. Heinrich Haag, from Munich, was his opposite. A quiet man with skin so loose he could stretch it 7 inches wide. They called him the India Rubber Man, and when he pulled his sides apart, he looked almost winged. Both men built careers on what others called deformity, crafting personas that blurred science and showmanship. In a time when medicine meant humiliation, they found power in spectacle. Theirs were not sad lives. They were deliberate performances, rehearsed, controlled, and paid for in cash. They stood under lights, accepted every stare, and left when they chose. The audience saw freaks. They saw survival. The curtain always fell their way. Number 6. Talon Crawford. Talon Crawford was born in 1975 and became known in the sideshow world as Bat Boy and the Outcast. Standing 3.5 feet tall, his face carried a distinct shape, sharp features and wide eyes that earned the nickname long before he embraced it himself. For years, Talon performed in modern-day sideshows across the U.S., touring with small carnival troupes that still kept the spirit of the old freak tents alive. He wasn't a curiosity. He was a professional, often mixing comedy and storytelling into his act. By 2005, though, he'd stepped away from the stage. Married to Roxy, with a daughter, he built a quieter life in Washington state. Talon once said he didn't retire out of shame but love. He wanted to be home when his daughter learned to walk. His story is rare among sideshow performers, not one of tragedy, but of someone who learned when to take the spotlight and when to let it go. All right, guys, now, let's head over to Number 5. The Illusionist of Two Selves. Fred Vann, known to audiences as Fred, claimed to be born in 1908, but his act had little to do with dates. He was a classic half-and-half performer, presenting one side as male, the other as female. He wasn't intersex. He used costume and illusion to split himself in two. And it worked. Fred claimed he appeared in Freaks, 1932, though uncredited. Josephine Joseph took the spotlight, but Fred may have been in the background. In 1933, performing as Francis Farrell, he took the stage at the Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago, claiming to have toured all 50 states and every major vaudeville circuit. As work dried up, he slid into geek shows, biting chicken heads just to stay fed. But in the 1970s, decades later, he dusted off the wig and returned as Fred under Ward Hall's banner. The spotlight was smaller, the crowds thinner, but he showed up anyway. Aging didn't erase him. He refused to vanish. Number 4. The Great Waldo. Dagmar Rothman could make a crowd fall silent just by swallowing. Born in Germany in 1920, he became known as the Great Waldo, the regurgitating geek, and the human ostrich. In the 1940s, Ripley's Auditorium in New York billed him as the man who could eat anything. Coins, watches, goldfish, rings, even live frogs. He took them all in and brought them back, perfectly intact. The show was brutal, but mesmerizing. Each act left his body aching, yet he kept going, driven by the roar of the crowd. Fame faded fast. The spotlight dimmed, the applause slowed, and loneliness crept in. When the woman he loved left, Waldo ended it himself, poisoned by gas in his home, his body found days later. The newspapers wrote a single line: "Performer found dead." But Waldo's act wasn't madness. It was control. He mastered the art of taking what the world gave him, swallowing it whole, and spitting it back untouched. Number 3. The Fat Lady of Coney Island. Amanda Siebert wasn't always known as Jolly Irene. She weighed around 120 pounds until the birth of her child at 21. After that, everything changed. A sudden hormonal imbalance caused her body to gain weight rapidly, eventually reaching nearly 700 pounds. In a world where size became a show, Irene took control. She joined the Ringling Brothers sideshow under the name Jolly Irene, a title that blended market gimmick and genuine cheer. By many accounts, her spirit truly was joyful. When she grew too large for standard train travel, she limited performances to Ringling's New York shows and made Coney Island her home. There, she became a fixture. Audiences came for the scale, but stayed for her energy, bold, kind, and unbothered by whispers. Irene didn't choose her condition, but she chose what to do with it. She wasn't a freak to be stared at. She was a woman who refused to let anyone shrink her worth. Number 2. Irma Lustau. Irma Lustau's name appeared on European banners in bold black paint. Die Panther Dame, the Panther Woman. Born in France, she had a rare skin pattern that created dark, ring-like spots around her legs and a band of hair circling her head, earning her the nickname Leopard-Spotted Woman. She entered sideshows at a time when Europe's fascination with the exotic blurred cruelty and curiosity. Irma didn't snarl or crawl for the crowd like promoters wanted. She stood still, composed, and let people wonder if what they saw was real. Her quiet defiance made her unforgettable. In some photos, her expression is half regal, half exhausted, as if she knew the world would look but never understand. Though little is recorded about her later years, Irma remains one of the rare European performers remembered not for grotesquerie, but for presence. She wasn't the Panther Woman they sold. She was a woman who faced every stare and never once flinched. And thanks to Holy God, the freak show's craze is now over. Number 1. The Joined Performers. Lucio and Simplicio Godino were born conjoined in the Philippines in 1908. As children, they were brought to Coney Island and displayed until the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children intervened. With no family to claim them, they were adopted by the Philippine ambassador to the U.S., a decision that changed everything. They received an education, learned music, and found their voice on stage. In 1929, they married identical Filipino twins, non-conjoined, and created a vaudeville act combining music, dance, and banter. No longer just a curiosity, they became a performance. But in 1936, tragedy struck. Lucio died of pneumonia. Doctors attempted a risky surgical separation, technically a success, but Simplicio died days later from meningitis. They had lived one life, but with intent. They'd turned spectacle into art and pity into applause. In the end, though separated by death, they're still remembered as one. Two brothers who refused to be defined by what bound them. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.